Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Jason's Take On podcast with myself, Jason Noble, here in a sunny-ish and warm London, and my partner in bold thinking, Mr. Whitehead. Say hello, Jason.
Hello, Jason.
Today, we're going to dive into another big question that has kind of been simmering, if you want, in the world of customer success. And I think it is time to talk about it, but the question is customer success as we know it, is it dying? Is it changing? Or is it evolving? We've seen the headlines, layoffs, AI reshaping interactions, and companies restructuring different teams, including customer success altogether. But maybe this isn't the end. Maybe it is the start of something bigger. And today we're going to dive into what this is, what's coming, and what bold moves customer success leaders need to make for this next era of customer growth. So let me throw this over to you, Jason. Before we get
hmm
into the history and all the big changes, when did we first, or when did you first sense that something here was just changing and a need for doing something different? What kind of triggered it?
Yeah, I think for me, it's been growing for a while, and I'm glad we're having this conversation because I do think CS is broken in its current form. And I think the intent is great, but the delivery is not quite what we're hoping for. So I've seen a few things. One, I've seen a lot more CS teams doing a lot of check the box activities. Are we following this process? Are we having a QBR? Are we doing the stuff that everyone tells us we need to do, but not really having the impact? And then as you start to see budgets hitting, and I've seen a lot of this lately, entire CS departments getting laid off, CS leaders and teams getting shut. And I think when you see budgets start to go, it's a real sign that people don't think you're the most critical element of their organization. And for me, that's really telling. And I remember a while ago, I was reading an article about marketing, and the article was about you cut this marketing activity, and if you don't notice a difference, you never really needed it. Stop wasting your time and budget. And I kind of think that's where CS is getting to in some areas. Like, all right, let's just cut it and see. And it turns out, I think in a lot of cases, they cut it and it's like, oh, it's not having a negative impact on retention or revenues or things that we thought it would. Maybe we can really live without this. And that, for me, that's a very telling sign. But what about for you? When did you
I,
first
I
start to
think
think
that
that something's
that
a mess?
that last point is really key though, because it's over what time period are we looking at?
Mhm.
So if we say, right, we'll cut it, we
Yeah,
don't see an immediate impact, okay, maybe you think, okay, I can justify it. But how do you look into the future, 3 months, 6 months, a year ahead, when customers stop renewing because the business has gone
right.
back to an old way of thinking? And I think, like you say, a lot of this has been brewing. We've seen businesses and customers struggle with understanding the real value from customer success in many occasions, not all.
Mhm.
But
Yep.
what are we doing? Are you support? Are you sales? And I've seen many teams and organizations where you've got customer success that's very reactive. And it is,
hmm
it's like a glorified support. And again, that's
Right.
that's not what's needed. And it does create a confusing message. So I think it's absolutely something that we've seen. I mean, since you and I have known each other, I think over the last 5, 6, 7 years, it's always been there, that kind of undertone in the background. But why let's
Right.
kind of rewind a bit. I mean, where just for listeners, I mean, where did the traditional, maybe that's the wrong word, but maybe
Yeah.
where did this customer success model, as we understand it, where did it come from, and why did it work for a time?
Right. Well, I even question did it work for a time, but when I look back though, you look at back, pre Salesforce in the 80s, 90s, 2000s. The traditional model was on premise, and it was the software companies sold a big pile of software right up front. They got all their money right up front, and they didn't really care about what happened afterwards. There were not a lot of renewal concerns. There was a little bit of getting people to pay for ongoing maintenance, but they made their money up front, and so they really weren't worried about were customers adopting the software and getting value from it. And then when the subscription model came in, suddenly that all switched. And what happened is, if people weren't adopting your software, if they weren't getting value from it, they weren't renewing, they weren't expanding. And the software vendors realized that their revenue model was quickly breaking. Where they changed it with the subscription model. They made it easier to sign people up and lower costs, and people could buy more and get access to more. And it was an easier decision because it's risky, but then it was easier for them to leave too. And in my mind, a lot of the user adoption risk and the value creation risk transferred from the customer back to the vendor. And so the vendors realize we've got to do something to help our customers get enough adoption and enough value that they will stick around and keep buying our software and buy more. And that's really where it came from, is they realized that customers, and the reality is customers are not really good at getting value from IT on their own. They need more help to do it. They can get it live. They can get people trained on it. They can get the data loaded. They can do all those things, which they've done for years and years and years. But getting enough value that they're convinced that it's worth the investment, that's a hard thing to do. And so for me, that's really where the model started, and where it came in. You know, so
I,
so that's
I was going to
the
say, just
history, I think.
I agree. I think it is. There is a lot of history to this, and I think there's absolutely been trigger points in history as to saying
Hmm.
there is a problem here that we need to address. And I think for me, a lot of this, you and I have talked before, lots, and this what we're trying to do in customer success. The thinking isn't new. We're trying to grow, retain,
Hmm.
and ensure our customers get value from us over a long period. And that's not a new principle. I go back to when I first started my career in kind of
Yep.
financial services and then in technology. We were doing this. It was all on-prem, but we were still trying to drive value for customers. We just didn't call it customer success. I
Right.
think what's also happened is, and to your point about IT and adoption, the technology industry, we're all loving this industry, love where we are,
Hmm.
but there's been a big focus perhaps more on the technology than on the customer. And I think we've perhaps
Yeah.
lost sight over what the customer really wants and why they're engaging with us, which is why this has come about. And I always say, for me, the role that we're actually playing is helping as customer success leaders, is helping our businesses be more customer centric and make sure we're thinking about the customer. So it's a shift. And I think all the points you've made are so key. And I think we are changing, and there's absolutely a need to make that shift again now.
Yeah, I completely agree with that too. And it's kind of, the whole idea of customer success, it's a very noble thought, and it's a very great idea. Not to bar your name a little bit, that we're going to help our customers be more successful than they can be on their own. We're going to help them create value where they can't on their own. It's a great intent, and it's a great idea, and it's very aspirational. But when you look at what's actually done, it's like, are a lot of the activities that CS teams do actually creating that value, or is it just we think this will work? And there's maybe a little bit of arrogance involved too. Like, how do we know what it takes to get our customers to
Yep.
be more successful? And what I find very interesting is when I work with a lot of SaaS vendors internally, when I look at how much adoption they get from the systems that they purchase, whether it's their CRM or their other systems, or when I look at the value that they're getting, it's kind of a shit show. And just like, okay, you
It's a
can't do it
great
for
activity.
yourself, but you're gonna
It's
do
the
it for your
same problem.
customers.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
it's the same problem, isn't it? Absolutely the same problem.
It really is. So tell me, Jason, though, now that we're sort of into this, what for you were the early warning signs that the CS model was falling apart and that something needed to change?
I, I think, I mean, you hit on a few key things there that I think customers started questioning the decisions to do this. We don't might not need this. Is this really adding value? I think of businesses who've gone through a lot of economic changes as budgets become
Hmm.
tighter. There's naturally a question on this, but I think what we've also done in customer success traditionally is focused too much on what for me are vanity internal metrics, things
Hmm.
like NPS. That doesn't tell customers necessarily a great thing. It's more important for me customer
Right.
satisfactions, or that then looking at adoption rates. What we're forgetting about is how well is our tool helping the customers be successful, and our tools only play a small part in them being successful. It's not everything for the customer. So we're not focusing on business outcomes. And I think because we're looking more, or we've been traditionally looking more at these more internally focused metrics,
Hmm.
it's made customer success more siloed, which is almost it's ironic, because for me, what we should be doing in customer success is breaking down all of these silos and being proactive, but it's kind of
Yeah.
shifted us back. And I think when we are, let's say we're measuring internal metrics, we're looking at NPS and all these things, and when those perhaps don't go the direction we want, people start questioning what we're doing. And I think
Hmm.
the whole way that we're positioning customer success, both internally and showing the results internally into customers, has really shifted. And I think this is really
Yep.
kind of transforming how it's being positioned in with organizations. Well, what do you think?
I agree with that. I think that there's a lot of, internal cheerleading going on with
Yep.
the metrics and this and that.
Great
When I look
phrase.
back at it as well too, a lot of the experts, a lot of the companies that sell platforms like customer success platforms and those sort of things, they've got, yes, you need to have this, you need to have these metrics. And everyone's like, okay, yeah, sure, sounds great. And they make a very convincing story. But I think there's not a lot of people like, but what if we don't? And and how does this look like if we don't have them? You know, I get that you need to, internally, we've talked about this before too. If you're a CS leader, you need to prove the value of your team and your organization. So how do you need to do that? Of course, you absolutely need to find some way to convince your CEO and your CFO that investing in customer success is important. But I think, for me, if you look more at just like the churn numbers and the revenue numbers and are customers sticking around, are customers getting value? That's pretty much the story you need to tell. The other stuff, it's nice. You obviously want your customers to be satisfied and to be excited about this stuff, but it's not the top priority. The top priority is, are they getting enough value that they stay? And a customer, they can be as happy as a clam, but if they're not getting value, if they can't prove to their CFO internally that this is worth the investment, they're not going to stick around. So, solve the root cause issue. And for me, that is, how do you help your customers achieve and perceive value that they can't create on their own? But let me ask you this, as we're talking about, you know, CS being broken in a lot of ways, what sort of forces do you see from outside CS that's really accelerating all this? What's driving this now?
Really, really good question. I think there's a number of big ones, and we've kind of hit on these a bit already in the conversation. But
Mhm.
I think the economy is very different. Companies and organizations, and the way that a lot of funding's done, quite rightly, is demanding maybe not necessarily an immediate ROI, but a much quicker ROI. And I think with customer success,
Mhm.
if you're looking at long-term growth, that long term isn't 3 months, 6 months. It might be 12 months. It might be 24 months. You're looking at
Mhm.
long-term partnerships. So that's number one. I think the pace of technology change is number two, particularly looking at AI. We've
Yep.
suddenly seen massive leaps forward in how well bots, if you want to call it that, agents can handle different services like onboarding, risk levels, customer health scoring,
Mhm.
and even better automation around renewals. So technologies helping remove the need for that traditional human intervention. And then I think also and for me, this is one of the biggest ones, and I think we're all very, very wary of this as consumers ourselves, is that
Mhm.
customer expectations have shifted. We all, as consumers today,
Yep.
demand a lot more, expect a lot more, and those expectations for what that experience looks like have shifted up significantly. And it's not just about the best seamless experience, but it's I want value now. And
Right.
so organizations and customer success teams have really had to keep up or lose focus and get left behind. Are there any that you'd add to that?
I think those are some really good ones. But I definitely think for me, the economy is driving a lot of this right now. I mean, AI is really important because that goes to scale and how quickly can we do operations? How can we do them faster, easier, cheaper, kind of thing. But ultimately, I think it comes down to companies are struggling right now. It's there's a lot of good things for some parts of the economy, and some companies are doing very, very well. And it's not like during COVID when everyone was suddenly impacted at the same time. So there's winners and losers at the moment, but I think there's definitely pressure out there, and I think investors are expecting a lot more as well too. Like, show me the return, show me the value, show me where you are. So I don't know. I think that's the big one, and frankly, we've not done a good job, and we've been saying this for years of as a CS community of really tracking our activities to the value that's the delta in value that's created by our activities, and we've not done a great job of proving that internally. So of course it's like, okay, well, why do I really need you, and what happens if I don't have you? What happens if we do less? Um, I'm starting to wonder. I don't think it's there yet, but I think as more and more software buyers are getting exposed to CS teams and departments from a variety of different vendors, I think the buyers are getting a little savvier, not quite realize, oh, getting value isn't all about the features and functions of the platform. And they're seeing some software vendors that are really good at their CS team driving value for the customer and really good at taking them through the steps of you need to do this, do this, do this, and others are not. And I think people are starting to see like, oh, this CS team is not worth my time to get on the call. This platform is not that important to me. These other ones that have my time and attention, they are important. They are creating value. So I'm going to focus on them. So I think we're starting to see a bit of things there. I don't know.
We talked about this before, and we've done an episode on that, but it's
Mm-hmm.
using customer success to be a competitive advantage. And
Right.
when you're a buyer or users of these tools, imagine you're in an organization, you've got 5, 10 different software services and tools you use. They've all
Mm-hmm.
got different CS teams. They're all trying to engage with you. They're all doing it differently. You're going to make a
Yep.
natural judgment as to actually which one of these works for how I want, which one really is focused on the value, and which one do I
Mm-hmm.
have time for. And so I think that understanding and visibility of it is a really key thing.
Absolutely. And I think buyers need to become more sophisticated. I think they're working in that direction. But I would love to see, like even software sales folks right now, they still do a lot of feature function selling. And this is great. This is great. But I think a couple of things would help. One, if I would, and I've advocated for this for a while, I would love to see software sales folks have their compensation tied to adoption outcomes over the first 3 years. And if a customer's not adopting, if they're not getting the outcomes that they need and renewing, the software the salesperson, their commission should reflect that. Because I think it's, software sales is not an easy gig. It's really a hard game, and some people are good at it. Some people have the aptitude for it, but you need to be selling on value creation and you need to be able to prove. And I think if buyers like, as part of the vendor evaluation process, I want each vendor to tell me their renewal rates, tell me their churn rates, all these other things. And that is a proxy for how much value their customers are perceiving from their product. If that's part of the sales equation, that's very different. And also I think if sales were like, here's how much value we create for other customers, and here's this much value in your organization, I think that's a very different model. And suddenly CS needs to be able to prove their value. And that would be really interesting to say, okay, what does the CS team need to do to help win a sale by saying, this is how we're going to prove to you that what we've done with our other customers will work for you. And I think that could be a hell of a shift for them.
I think that's so important, and it's that goes to, how do you know that your model, the way we're doing it, is
Right.
still stuck in the past? And I think if we can't, not just CS, but the business, if we can't tie what we're doing and what we're selling
Mm-hmm.
and building directly to customer outcomes, which might be revenue, it might, but it's those outcomes, and that in itself just says there's a problem. And I think if you look at CS,
Mm-hmm.
if your team is buried in support escalations, just standardized tick the box playbooks, if you're being reactive, you're not really engaging in relationships, having those strategic conversations, that's when there's a real problem. And I think
Absolutely.
what happens there is that you're seen more as a cost center rather than part of a revenue generating part of the business, and that's when it's a serious risk.
Absolutely. And I think maybe that we might have stumbled on something that if your CS team is so valuable to your customers and is perceived as so valuable that your sales folks want to bring you in to help close a deal because they think it's going to make the competitive differentiation, then you've got something. If your salespeople don't see the value in it to the point that they're going to bring you in to help close a deal, you've got some work to do. But let me ask you, Jason, as we're talking about this and let's talk solutions here. If the old model's on the way out, what's going to replace it? How does CS need to be different? If you were to reimagine it from scratch, knowing now what we didn't know then, what would you do differently?
It's like, I think just going to your last point is one of those key things, and I've been a big advocate this always in a lot
Hmm.
of organizations, is bring your CS team in to helping close those specific deals and sales opportunities where we can show what we've done, show how we're working with other customers. So I think there's a number of things still needed around solutions and what we do. And I think it's
Hmm.
customer success needs to be viewed more of a broader customer growth, customer revenue type team that's
Hmm.
focused on outcomes, growth, and profitability, not just outcomes at any cost and growth at any costs. And so I think we've got to have a much closer alignment with sales. We've got to have a much closer alignment with marketing. And I think for me, it almost does it become, and I'm still not sure of this in my own mind yet, does it become a much evolved version of account management as it used to be? So maybe not account management 2.0, but account management 3.0, where we're focused more on the customer. What
Mhm.
makes that growth? What do the customers want? And I think, we're seeing big changes around technology. This idea of digital first, I think that's going to become standard. People are going to get what they want from
Mhm.
products more and more. We're going to see product led success. And I think what the customer success team will do is they'll be a lot more closely aligned with customers in more of a consultancy type relationship. And
Right.
there is more strategic value drivers and not just task managers. Where are the customers going? What are their growth plans? How do we ensure that we're aligning with those and we can deliver value to the part of the value chain that we deliver value in? We're not everything for the customer. We're one part of it. And I think that's critical. So I think there's going to be, sorry, this big shift over the coming years. And it's not something that's going to happen overnight. I think we saw, the
Mhm.
kind of customer success as it started off took a long time to get there. And I think we'll see this transition now to a world where we're even more focused on the customers, but focused on what matters to the customers as a standard way of working. What do you think?
You know, I think what I'd like to see happen versus what will happen are probably very different. And I agree that CS needs to evolve wholeheartedly. But what I'd like to see is really reinvent itself at its core problem they need to solve, which comes back to adoption and outcomes, achieve and perceive value. And I think that's where customers still struggle. Customers are not really good at getting people to use their technology in a way that creates clear and compelling value. And they don't know enough about it. And when I look back at the days of the on-premise, the old rule of thumb used to be whatever you paid for the software, you had to budget two and a half to three times as much to get it implemented and get it adopted in some change management. And change management then was not very good. But I think with the SaaS model, people are like, oh, it's suddenly so easy. We can have the software turned on today. They seem to forget that they still need to do work other than training to drive change, to drive adoption, all those things. So I would love to see software vendors reimagine themselves as an adoption and outcomes team where they don't, professional service to really help their customers all the way through that. And I would like to see each customer have as part of the onboarding process, each customer sets up their own internal adoption and outcomes team. So you have these two teams that are really focused on way that creates value, and then the outcomes will follow. But you need to be able there to identify what are those outcomes we're striving for, and are we achieving them? And then you might still have, like in CS, I think you have a really valid point that you still need to have that commercial side, that account management side in a different flavor. But maybe that does need to be separated out if you have deep expertise in adoption outcomes. That right now I think vendors don't have it and customers don't have it, and I think that's really falling down for them. But ultimately, that was the core reason that CS became is because people weren't using the software and getting value from it. So let's come back to solving that core problem, drop a lot of the crap that doesn't have to be there, and stop thinking in terms of onboarding, because that's internal. Oh, our customers, we can get them through the initial phase and then they'll be fine. We can ignore them. No, let's focus on that ongoing long-term adoption and what needs to happen there, and get the customers to focus on that as well too. Because I think a lot of customers are not focused on adoption and outcomes. They're focused on training and getting the system live.
The interesting thing with adoption as well, if you go back to the earlier point about if I'm an
Mhm.
organization and I've got lots of different platforms and services, do you have
Right.
teams at the customer that are focused on adoption of each of these? Or do you have one team that understands change management better? Because again, you can't, you look at the number of different platforms out there and tools and technology
Mhm.
that any organization use. You can't have individual adoption teams. So you've got to think, how do you scale it? And it does, as
Right.
we said before, it requires a specialist skill set. Change management is a fundamental skill and understanding how it works. So, to your point, do organizations create their own change teams that are there to drive change? And that becomes I think change is a constant now, and it's getting even more and more so.
Oh
So
yeah.
we need a team internally that's helping us navigate that change and get on board with it.
I think you're absolutely correct. They do need that. And, I think for a lot of folks, their internal IT departments, CIO, CTO, whatever, they're focused on getting systems set up and live and maintaining them and, patches and security. And they've got a lot on their plate. but they've never really been tasked. Organization needs to do that, and I would love to see in the buyers organizations, especially in large companies, they need to rank order all of their systems based on adoption and value creation, value delivered to the business, and be able to justify to their CFO and CEO every year, this is why we need to keep spending on this platform, because there's a lot of redundant platforms, there's a lot of underused platforms that are not creating value. And I think suddenly if CEOs and CFOs in the buyers organization actually cared about the return on investment that they get from their IT platforms, you'd see some very different behaviors than they are right now. And I think a lot of folks on the buyer side, especially CEOs and CFOs, IT is kind of a black hole. We know we need to have it. I don't fully understand it, and so I'm not going to focus on that. I'm going to focus on the other things of running my business. And I think they need to really view it as a strategic differentiator and a driver for company growth, not from having the systems, but from having them used effectively.
You,
But
you
my
look
little rant.
at that same question though, you do think, if any of these technologies that organizations have got are redundant, how have they
Right.
been sold to the organization? Fascinating
Hmm.
question. Have they been sold there, and who's making those decisions? So it's a big shift. Let me ask you another question, Jason. If
Hmm.
we if we're looking at kind of big changes in leadership now, what
Hmm.
going back to our theme about bold ideas, I
Yeah.
mean, what bold changes in leadership are needed now if we're going through this change?
Well, one, I think CS leaders need to really take a good hard look at what they're doing and see, one, ask themselves, is this the right thing to be doing? Is this the right thing for our business? Is this the right thing for our customers? And are we having the impact that we intend to have? And if we're not, get aggressive about cutting crap out that's no longer working, or get aggressive about radically rethinking what needs to be done. Talk to your customers about what needs to change for them to achieve and perceive value in their organization, because ultimately that's what matters. And maybe you don't need QBRs, maybe you don't need all these vanity metrics, maybe you don't need to think just about onboarding, but you need to think about that long-term piece. Really go through and say, where customers come in and they're always excited, they're nervous, but they're excited when they first lose them, and why, and what do we need to change. So there's a lot of things there, but they need to get comfortable with starting over and saying, CS is a grand experiment, and we've been trying this for the first 5 years, 10 years, whatever it's been. We've learned, or hopefully we've learned a lot. Here's what we need to do more of. Here's what we need to do less of. Here's what we're not sure. Let's test it out and do. But they need to radically embrace change, because if they don't, their department will be eliminated at some point. I think we're seeing that already. Like, it's like, okay, if you can't prove the value, and if everyone's not agreed that this is a top investment priority for our organization, you're at risk. But what would you say? What would you like to see from a
I,
bold leadership perspective?
I'd agree with all of those, and I think that the really just to add, I think the really big thing we've got to do is we've got to kind of take charge, and
Hmm.
we're not waiting to be told we have to change and do it differently. The CS leaders that are really going to succeed have to be driving this change, understand what the challenges are, understand the pain points for their customers, the pain points for our business. What do we need to do, and make those really sometimes challenging but bold decisions? And I think that's absolutely critical.
Yeah. I think, like in sales and stuff, a lot of times when you're talking about it, you're like, oh, my client may or may not have the budget for all of this. We want to get a part of their wallet share, and get
Yep.
a portion of the money out there. CS leaders need to realize they're fighting for their own internal budgets, especially, if the company's budget was suddenly reduced by 30%, would they still invest in CS? Are you that much of a priority? Are you that important to folks? Are you having such an impact that if you were gone, your customers would leave?
Yep.
And if the answer to any of those is no, you need to do some bold thinking right now and really come up with some new ways to achieve your mission. Um, so those are some of my thoughts out there. So let's bring it home though. What sort of bold challenge would you like to put to our audience out there?
I think it's really key, this, because I think there's also, as well as challenges and changes, this is a huge opportunity for people and organizations
Hmm.
to do this better and really drive, ironically, more success for our customers and ourselves. And I think the opportunity to change and shift what we call customer success today really becomes for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And I think it's in these times of change that real leadership stands out, and it's more about reinvention. What are we going to do differently? So
Yep.
I think the ultimate message is that we're not, customer success isn't dying, it's evolving, and it's evolving rapidly, and it's evolving more in line with what the customers want. And I think business leaders and success leaders who can let go of these old, outdated, reactive ways of working, outdated playbooks, and can boldly build more outcome faced, perhaps technology enabled, AI enabled, growth driving teams are really going to help drive the future of customer relationships. And I
Mhm.
think that's customer relationships, sorry. And I think that's absolutely fundamental. So I think the bold challenge question for our listeners out there is this week, if you could choose one outdated customer success process or metric that you're using, which would it be? And can you kill it? And can what
Mhm.
would you replace it with? You know, what bold outcome driven change would you replace that with?
Yep. I love that. You're the CS leader. You don't need the permission. Lead the change.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Absolutely.
It is. It's about change, and it goes back to all of this. Is businesses are changing. You know, we're changing, we're evolving. It goes back to change management. I think this has been some big questions in this episode, Jason, and a really, really cool
Yeah,
conversation. To our listeners, if this sparks something for you, if you'd like to follow up with us, we'd love to have you on as a guest. But do share it with your team, share it with your network. Let us know what you think.
absolutely. Thanks for everyone. Appreciate it.
Everyone.